Come on, I love it. So we're going to jump in. Is anyone ready to jump into the Word today? A few of y'all. Did anyone bring a copy of the Scriptures with you? Come on, we say this every week. This is not just a book that we read. It's a book that reads us. If you don't have a copy of the Scriptures, we'd love for you to grab one on your way out. That's our gift to you. But we wholeheartedly believe that when we open up this Word, that God will use the Spirit of God to use the Word of God to help the children of God look more like the Son of God. That's what we want to see happen in this gathering. And so my prayer has been that we would be changed and transformed from the inside out as we engage with it. As always, if something's good, you can say, come on. If you don't know what to say, you can give me a Christian moo. It sounds like this. We are in the final week of our How to Really Change series, where we've been talking about how do we find real and lasting change? How do we find real and lasting change? That for many of us in the room, we start the year with our goals and our resolutions and our plans. And if you're anything like me, you get halfway through the year or to the end of the first quarter or third month of the year, or honestly, you get to the third day of the year and that goal that you had is gone, right? And so we have these plans, these grandiose plans to change, but we find ourselves with the same rhythms and same habits and nothing really changing. And so the question is, how do we find this real lasting change that we so desperately desire? And so in the first week of the series, we said, well, that real change actually starts with a heart change. That it's not about behavior modification and changing our actions and behavior, but that what we actually need is for God to change our heart. That we need him to get on the inside and deal with the mess that's in here, to deal with the brokenness that's in here, for us to go to God and go, I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to be this man anymore. I don't want to be this woman anymore. I got some things in me that I need you to get out of me. I cannot change them on my own. I need you to change my heart. And that when your heart changes, that your behavior begins to change as a result. That was week one. In week two, we said not only do you need a heart change, but you need godly guidance. You need God to guide you into the direction that he wants you to go, and that our role in this is simply obedience. That when God says go, we go. When he says do, we do. And so we talked about in the second week of this series, how does God guide us? And we looked at the three ways that God uses to guide his people, that he uses his word, that he uses his people, and that he uses his Spirit. And so we talked about being guided by God towards change. This morning, what I want to do is show you one last idea that I believe is essential if we're going to see change in our life. And to do that, I want to take you to one of my favorite pictures of Kylie and I. This is us at Mount Rushmore. And I love this picture for a couple of reasons. One, it reminds me of a time where we had no children and we had the freedom to do whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. That was pretty amazing. It reminds me also of a time that we thought we were incredibly busy and we had no idea what busy even meant, you know. But the thing that I really love about this picture is it reminds me of not just the moment at Mount Rushmore, but the journey that it took to get there, this amazing road trip that we got to experience together, the last road trip that we did together by ourselves before we had kids. And so I think about that trip every time I look at this picture. It was a 60-hour trip in the car. We intended to go to Denver. We'd never been to Denver before. It was on both of our bucket lists. And so we made a plan that we were going to drive over Christmas break in a Hyundai Elantra to two-wheel drive, by the way. All the guys in the room are like, you're an idiot, and I can tell where this is going, to Denver in the winter. We left our house in Atlanta. We drove up to Nashville, spent a couple of days with my mentor there, left Nashville, drove to Chicago, spent Christmas with Kylie's family. We left Chicago and drove to Wisconsin, which was a complete waste of time because there's no reason to ever go to Wisconsin. I'm sorry if you're from Wisconsin. I am so sorry I said that. Not that I made fun of your state just because you're from there. It's really difficult for you. And then we left Wisconsin, and then we proceeded to go to the only state that's worse than Wisconsin. We went to Iowa. And we had to stop in Iowa, and so Kylie, for some reason, I don't know why you did this, babe, but she thought it was a good idea to let me book the Airbnb that we were going to stay in. And I'm an experienced person. I want things to feel unique. I want them to feel different. I want them to feel special. And so I'm going through Airbnb, and I want to find an experience for us. And I find us a vintage 1800s Airbnb to stay in for the night. Now, what I missed in the description is by vintage 1800s Airbnb, they meant that it had not been touched since the 1800s. And so we walk into this Airbnb, and we are immediately hit with the smell of mothballs. We look on the carpet, and there are all sorts of stains all over the floor. Kylie was pretty sure there was blood on the floor, like somebody had been axe murdered in this house in the 1800s. And she looks at me in the face, and she goes, Gerald, which is how I knew I was in trouble, because it's usually Babe. So if I get Gerald, it's usually Babe or hot chocolate, but Gerald is like not good, you know? She goes, Gerald, look at me. We are not staying here. And I looked at her and I said, babe, we paid for this. And we are in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. We are staying here. So I grabbed our bags, I brought them in, started walking around the house, making sure everything was okay. I walk into the bedroom, and when I get into the bedroom, there are portraits of women from the 1800s surrounding the bed as if they are waiting for us to fall asleep to kill us. And I look at Kylie and I say, babe, look at me. We are not staying here. Pack everything up, we get in the car, we find the nearest hotel, we spend the night, we wake up in the morning, we're eating breakfast, we're watching the news, and as we're watching the news report reads, Winter Storm Renee is on the way. Now, I think it's because I'm from the hood, I heard it like this, Winter Storm Renee is on the way. I'm like, okay, cool, what's going on with Renee? Well, they proceed to tell us that it's about to dump snow from heaven, and we better find shelter in Iowa. And I'm looking at Kylie like, I am not spending the next 3 or 4 days in Iowa. There is no shot. That is not happening. We got to get out and beat this storm. And she's like, I'm down. I'm like, that's right, you're my ride or die. And I'm glad, because those are literally the options. We're going to ride and make it through, or we're going to die in Iowa. Those are the choices. And so we get in the car, and I take off. I'm driving down the highway, y'all. I'm driving a speed that I cannot tell you because I'm a pastor. But I was listening to Hillsong while I was doing it, so it was okay, And so we're driving, and we just get over the state line of South Dakota, and when we do, Renee came and said, hey, at full speed. 30-mile-an-hour winds surrounding the car. Snow is just falling. I'm doing the wipers, and nothing is going anywhere. I'm watching 18-wheelers slide in front of me, and I'm trying to stay calm on the outside because I don't want Kylie to know that I'm scared. I'm like, thug life. I didn't choose it. It chose me. Like, we're good. But on the inside, I'm like, we're going to die. We're going to die in South Dakota. And I already can see the headline. Some police officer's going to find me. They're going to write a news report, and it's going to say, Black pastor dies in South Dakota in snowstorm. And everyone's going to read it, and they're going to go, why was he in South Dakota? Only Black person there. What in the world is going on here, We had this road mapped out, this trip that we had planned. We eventually make it through the storm, and we get to Mount Rushmore and make it to Denver and have a few amazing days. But I think about that, and I think about today for us, and I just wonder, what do you do when you have a map for your life? You have a plan for your life. You're going down a road, and you get hit by a storm that you did not see coming. Like, what do you do when you find yourself in the middle of a storm? What do you do when the mile-an-hour winds pick up from 0 to 30 and it is just spinning out of control? What do you do when you find yourself in a situation that you never hoped for and you were never expecting, and everything was going good, and then out of nowhere, everything seems like chaos? What do you do when your life is just falling apart? Like, what do you do when the people who were supposed to have your back turn their back on you? What do you do when the person that you were supposed to trust takes advantage of you? What do you do when the financial pressure is too much to bear? What do you do when you lose the job? What do you do when you and your spouse are constantly fighting and you're like, I don't think we're going to make it in this marriage? What do you do when you're depressed and anxious and you cannot get out of bed? What do you do when the doctor report comes in and there is no cure? What do you do when the cancer comes back and it rears its ugly head? What do you do when someone you love passes away? What do you do when you wake up in the morning and you wish you hadn't woken up? What do you do when you find yourself in the middle of a storm? I want to talk about that today as we talk about how to really change, because here's what I've seen is true, is that the storms of life will take you off of the path of change. That you will be going down the road of where God is wanting to lead you, and then you get hit with a storm in this life, and we either regress to who we were, or we find ourselves slipping into a deeper and darker place where we are turning to things to try to get us out of the situation, or to numb the situation, or to just help us get through it, and we are off the path that God was leading us down. That things were beginning to change in our life, that we were beginning to see God change and do some things in us, but then we get hit by a storm and everything gets thrown off. So what do we do when we've asked God to change our heart, when we're following his guidance, and then we just get fully blindsided by a storm? What do you do when you find yourself in the middle of a storm? To answer that, I want to take you to my favorite book of the Bible. I don't know that I'm supposed to have favorite books of the Bible, but I do. It's James. And if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and turn there. I'll give you a little context as you do. James is the half-brother of Jesus, because Jesus' father's God. Okay. So half-brother of Jesus, and James did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God or that Jesus was God when he was doing his earthly ministry. For 33 years, James served as the brother of Jesus, but never believed that Jesus was God. Well, then this thing happened where Jesus, dies on a cross, and he's buried in a grave, and then 3 days later, he resurrects. What would it take for you to believe that your sibling was God? A death, burial, and resurrection. And James sees his brother raised from the dead, and he starts to believe, I think he really is who he said he was. He becomes a follower of his brother and then a leader in the church. And what we find in the book of James is a letter that James writes to some persecuted Jewish believers. People who had just become Christians, who are walking with the Lord, but they find themselves in a season of suffering, in a season of persecution. And so he writes them this letter to encourage them. James chapter 1, starting in verse 1, it says this. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's wild. To write down on the pages of history, my brother is God and I am his servant. Crazy. To the 12 tribes who are scattered among the nations. 12 tribes who are scattered among the nations is a reference to these Jewish believers who have been spread out because of the persecution of their faith. If you go to Acts chapter 7, you see the stoning of Stephen, and immediately the Jewish believers begin to spread to these different countries. They're separated from, in cities, separated from their families, separated from their friends. They're ripped out of their homes, and now they're in new cities and new contexts, trying to figure out how to survive. They don't know who they can trust and who they can't trust. They don't know where they can go and where is safe. They are in a season of suffering and persecution, and James writes them this letter to encourage them in the middle of this suffering. And what he says might surprise you a little bit. It says this, verse 2. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. You have one opportunity, James, to encourage these people who are suffering, who are being persecuted, who are going through it. You get one letter that you get to write, and what's the first thing that you want to say? He goes, consider it joy when you face trials of many kinds. I want you to notice two things that James says here. One is when. James does not say, consider it pure joy if you face a trial. He says, consider it pure joy when you face trials. When, meaning this is not optional, it's going to happen. The storms of this life are coming, and there is nothing you can do to avoid it. You are going to face trials, and it's not just going to be like one struggle in your life. There's going to be many kinds. There's going to be a number of different ways that you experience suffering and trials and pain in this life. The first thing that James wants us to understand is this, is that suffering is not optional. It's coming, one way or another. One of the things we love to do is to hold on to the promises of Jesus, which is a great thing to do. And so in church, we'll say things like, he's always with you, which is amazing. That he's on our side, it's so good. He's going to fight our battles. He never fails. That he's stronger than your biggest struggles, and then we come up with catchy ways to say it. Stop telling God how big your problem is, but start telling your problem how big your God is. And then the keys come in at the right moment, and we feel emotional, and we run out of the doors, and we're ready to charge hell with a water pistol, and we're like, let's go! I'm holding on to that promise. What about the promise that Jesus says, hey, they hated me, so they're going to hate you as well? What about that one? Surprised that people are labeling you because of what you believe? Surprised that people are judging you? Surprised you don't get invited anymore? He goes, why are you surprised? They hated me. Of course they're going to hate you. They killed me. What do you think they're going to do? What about the promise that Jesus says, hey, if you're going to follow me, yes, grace, peace, mercy, love, joy, all of that, yeah, for sure, all of that is available to you. But you do know that if you're going to follow me, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, right? That following me is not getting what you want. Following me is giving up what you want and taking on what I want. Self-denial. Let's cling to that promise. What about John 16:33, where Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble? We're blindsided when suffering is a part of the story, but if we actually held on to the promises of Jesus, we would know that he's promised us troubles are a part of the story. They are unavoidable. A mentor of mine says it like this: you are either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or on your way into one. Those are the options. The storms of this life are coming, but James says, yes, the storms are coming, but don't miss this. You still have a choice. You have a choice. That no matter what happens to you in this life, you have a choice, and the choice is this, that you can actually consider it pure joy. Consider. That word consider is a word that's about perspective. It's about how you see. He's going, hey, just so you know, there's going to be trials that come in this life, but you actually have a choice in how you see it. You have a choice in your perspective. You have a choice of how you view this, what you're going to believe through this. Like, you may not be able to control what's happening to you, but you do have an opportunity to decide how you see. You see, when we face trials in this life, the question that many of us tend to ask is the question, why is this happening to me? Like, God, why me? Why is this my story and not their story? Why am I going through this and not them? Why does it have to be my family and my marriage and my kids and our bank account and my job? Like, I'm a way better performer than him. He didn't get laid off. They laid me off. Are you serious? God, why does it have to be us that deals with the cancer? Why does it have to be me that has a broken family? Why does it have to be us that my parents are going through this or my parents weren't? Like, why is this my story? Why me? And y'all, I'm not bringing condemnation for you asking that question. I just want to tell you, I can kind of relate to that. Because I've asked this question a number of times in my life. Why is this happening to me? I asked it when my dad left in the 3rd grade. It was 27 years before I saw him again. I asked it when my mom went to jail at 16 years old, the year after I made a decision to follow Jesus. I asked the same question when we were evicted every couple of years as a kid. And I'd come home from school and I'd find all my stuff next to a trash can, and I'm going, God, why is this happening to us again? I asked this question the year that 3 of my friends were murdered and 1 friend committed suicide in the same year. I asked this question the entirety of our first year of marriage. We get the phone call in the middle of the night from a number we don't know. It's my biological mom, and she asked me to come bail her out of jail. And the first time that my wife meets my mom is us bailing her out of jail. And she's just in the car like, hey, it's nice to meet you. This is awesome. And I'm like, this is not that moment. I asked it again when we find out that Kylie's dad had taken his own life. First year of marriage, these are the things that are happening, and we're going, God, why is this happening to me? But y'all, can I just tell you? I get asking the question, but every time I've asked this question, it just left me more frustrated. It just left me more confused. And all it ultimately did is distance me from God, and when I was distant from God, I made decisions that I regret. Like, when I look back on my life and I think about the worst decisions that I've made in life, they are often connected to some suffering that I was going through, that I was upset with God, so I created distance and I went to something else to solve the problem. Went to something else to take away the pain. I went to something else to fix it. And I'm just telling you, I understand the innate need to go, God, why is this happening? But can I just suggest to you what James is suggesting to you, that there's another option, that there's a different perspective. There's actually a different question that you and I could ask, and the question is this, is rather than asking God, why is this happening to me? What if you ask God, what are you up to? What are you doing right now? Where are you at work? What are you building? What are you changing? What are you trying to do in me and through me and around me? Because if you're up to something, I don't want to miss it. If there's a way to be in this with you, I do not want to miss the opportunity to walk through this with you and not on my own. So God, what is it that you are up to? That's what I really want to know. Why this is happening to me, having the answer to that, I don't know what that changes. But knowing what you're doing, oh man, that has the potential to change everything. Hear me. You may not get to control what happens to you, but you do get to control how you see it. You may not have control of the circumstance, but you do have control of how you see it. For some of you, it's some decisions that you made that put you in this circumstance, and you are spending your years regretting what you did back there. And y'all need to hear this from me today. I believe this is from the Lord. You cannot go back and change it, but you can control how you see it today. You may not get to control what happens, but you get to control how you see it. You can have a different perspective. You can have a different belief. You can decide how you are going to respond. And y'all, this is so important, because what the enemy wants more than anything is to take the struggles and the suffering that is happening in your life and do this. So that all you can see is the cancer. All you can see are the marriage problems. All you can see is the problem with your kid. All you can see is the bank account is low. All you can see is the suffering and the struggle and the storm in your life. He wants you fixated on this, because if all you can do is look at this, then you cannot see what God is doing all around you. That you can't see the way that he's moving. You can't see what he's trying to build up in you. And so the invitation from James is, y'all, don't look at your struggle and go, why is this happening to me? And let it consume every moment of your life. But what if you ask God to move it off to the side and go, this is real and this is hard and this is painful and it hurts, but I don't want to miss what you're doing. So rather than me being fixated on why, I want to know what. What are you doing? What are you up to? I don't want to miss it. And what you will find is that when you look through that filter, through that lens, with that perspective, you are going to find that God is actually up to something. And most of the time is that he's up to something in you. That's what James actually says next, verse 3. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith. Come on, can anyone in the room just testify to the reality that when you go through a trial, there are moments that you're like, God, I believe you, but it is hard to believe you right now. I'm the only one. Anyone else in the room, you go through something, you're like, I know what I'm supposed to say, I know what I'm supposed to believe, I know what I'm supposed to pray, but I just don't feel that right now. James says, you know what that is? It's a testing of your faith. It's, do you actually believe the things you say you'll believe? Will you actually do the thing that you know God is calling you to do? Will you stick with the faith when you face a trial? And he says those trials that test your faith, he goes, they're actually doing something. They're producing something in you. And he goes, this is what they're producing. Perseverance. You know the thing that's missing in our culture most right now? Resiliency. The ability to stick in it. The ability to keep going. The ability to not let the one kid that's bullying you keep you from going to your school. The ability to not let the one negative comment keep you from believing in who God has said you are. The ability to keep moving and pressing forward and not crawling yourself into a hole because you face some trials and adversity. He's going, come on, guys. You have to be resilient. You have to keep fighting. You have to keep pushing. You got to keep going. The kingdom of God is at stake. And so there are going to be some trials and there's going to be some suffering. There's going to be some things that you're going through, but those aren't meant to kill you. They're meant to make you stronger. They're going to produce some things in you. They're going to help you get to the finish line. They're going to help you be bigger and stronger and bolder and able to deal with the trials of this life. It is producing a perseverance in you. And he goes, and that's not even the end. It's not only producing a perseverance in you, but when that perseverance finishes its work, you know what you end up with? A mature and complete person who lacks nothing. The theological term for this is sanctification. You know what mature and complete looks like? Anyone know? Jesus. That's the goal, by the way. Imagine yourself as a block of wood. Some of you are oak, some of you are pine. I'd say another one, but I don't know another type of tree, so just imagine those two. You're the block of wood, there is a master carpenter. And as he looks at each of these different types of wood, he has the same picture in mind, that this oak and this pine and this birch, is that a tree? Birch. Are all going to be whittled and carved to look like Jesus. Here's the thing, I'm not a carpenter, but I do know this is true. You can't handle different types of wood the same way. You will use different tools in order to shape and mold the wood. And so for some of you, the tool that God is using to shape and mold you is singleness. For some of you, the tool that he's using to shape and mold you is marriage. For some of you, the tool that he's using to shape and mold you are kids. For some of you, the tool that he's using to shape and mold you is not having kids. For some of you, the tool that he is using is suffering in your finance. For some of you, it's suffering with health issues. For some of you, it's suffering with relationships. But there are things that are happening in your life that you're going, God, get me out of this. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Can you just fix it? And he's going, could you just be patient? Because it is a tool in the hand of the master carpenter that I am using to shape and mold you and build you so that you at the end of your life will look more like Jesus. Hear me. We are so concerned with God fixing things now that we are missing the reality that what God is doing is shaping us for eternity. Because the sanctified, complete, mature version of you is who you will be with God forever. And so what is enduring some suffering for 50 years? If it shapes us and molds us to look like who we get to be with God for all of eternity. He goes, guys, come on. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. But you can actually consider the struggle and the suffering that you're in as joy, because it is God who is going to use it to produce a thing in you that leaves you mature and complete, that leaves you looking like him. He says pain. Pain, y'all, is a part of the process. And you can't avoid it. Anyone ever put a Neosporin on a cut in the room? Anyone? I've never done that, at least not by my own fruition, because I'm a man. I have a buddy, though, who said his parents growing up wouldn't let him put Neosporin on a cut. And I asked him why. I was like, that's kind of weird. Why is that? I don't know if this is right, okay? So you can fact check it and then email me if I'm wrong, and I'll just forward them to him, but it preaches good. He said the reason that his parents wouldn't let him put Neosporin on a cut is because the way that Neosporin works is that it heals from the outside in. And so it'll heal your skin over the wound, but it actually hasn't done anything about the wound at all. And so his parents would say, hey, the way that your body is designed is to actually heal you from the inside out. That it needs to deal with the wound first, and then the skin can go over the surface. For some of us in the room, we are desperately asking God to put skin over the wound and not deal with the wound itself. And you wonder why you look okay on the outside, but you're dying on the inside. You wonder why everyone looks at your life and your Instagram and your house and your family, and they're like, oh my gosh, I wish, but inside you're going, I cannot wait for this to be over. Because we've settled for a surface level treatment when God wants to do a work inside of us. Pain is the part of the process, so maybe we don't ask God to take us out, we ask him to build us up. Maybe we don't ask God to take us out, we ask him to grow us. Maybe we don't ask him to get rid of it, we ask him to shape us and mold us. Maybe instead of asking God to fix it, we ask him to fix us. Now, some of you hear that and you go, Gerald, that sounds good, but what do I do tomorrow? Like, yeah, okay, I get to look like Jesus forever. Amazing, that's so great. Eternal perspective, I get it. On Monday, I have to deal with this. On Tuesday, the doctor appointment's coming. On Wednesday, I gotta go back into that situation. So that sounds good, but like this week is right in front of me and I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. So what do I do tomorrow? I'm so glad you asked. Because James actually answers that question for us. Verse 5. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you know there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? Knowledge is what you know, wisdom is the ability to do what you know. So he says, if any one of you doesn't know what to do in this season of suffering, he goes, here's a mind-blowing idea. Ready? Why don't you ask God? You're in a situation that's too big for you, why don't you ask God? He's bigger. You're in a situation where you don't have the knowledge, why don't you ask God? He has unlimited knowledge. You're in a situation where you don't have the wisdom, why don't you ask God? He has infinite wisdom. He'll say, if you don't know what to do, here's an idea. Ask God what to do. Instead of asking him to get you out, why don't you instead go, hey, God, what would you do? What would you have me do with this today? How would you have me walk into the meeting? How would you have me have this conversation? How would you have us deal with this season? Y'all, what if there's a reality that God is not like up there watching you, but that he's actually with you? And if you would ask him, he would show you the next step to take. You know, in the Old Testament, the prophets and the kings and people like Moses would have the Holy Spirit on them, people like David. And people would look at their lives and go, oh, I can't imagine what that would be like, to have the Spirit of God like on me and guiding me and directing me and being led by him and leading other people as he leads me. Like, that looks so amazing. And here we are as a New Testament church, and we've been promised not the Spirit on us, but the Spirit actually in us. That same Spirit will guide, direct, teach, lead, comfort, and show us what it is that we're supposed to do, and we just miss it. And James goes, don't miss it. Just ask. He says, and when you ask, he gives it to you generously without finding fault. I had a friend of mine tell me at the end of the year, he goes, hey man, you know, like we don't expect you to be perfect and have all the answers. And we don't think any less of you if you just ask if you don't know. Some of us walk through life with this mentality that if we ask God, he's going to go, after 30 years, you still don't get this? Really? Are you ever going to grow up? Are you ever going to get it? That God's going to be frustrated and he's going to judge you and he's going to be angry with you. But could I offer you a different perspective? Maybe God is actually like a dad who loves giving good instruction to his kids, who loves showing you what to do next. Now, a couple of things to preface. It may not be that he says what you want him to say. In fact, a lot of times it won't be. And he may not answer you the first time that you ask. Sometimes my kids have to go, hey, dad, hey, dad, hey, dad, hey, dad, 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 daddy, dad, dad, dad. dad, 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 hey dad, daddy, daddy, dad, 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 dad. Sometimes it's because I'm a bad dad and I'm ignoring them. Sometimes it's because I actually want to give them a little bit of space to process what they're asking, so that when I show them the answer, it has more meaning and weight. It's not that he doesn't care. It's not even that he's not listening. It just might not be the right time for you to have the answer. And so he goes, just keep asking. Keep believing. Keep trusting me. I'm a good dad. And I love giving answers to my kids. It may not be what you want to hear. It may not happen when you want to hear it. But he will answer, and he will not judge you. He will give you wisdom generously. See, y'all, I've been through some suffering and struggles in my life. And I've had moments where I've asked God the question, why is this happening to me? But there are a couple of times where I can recount having a different perspective, a different approach. And what I've seen God do in those moments, man, I want more of that for me, and I want more of that for you. As the band loads, I'll give you one more picture of this. Some of you know this story, but my identical twins were born on the week that the world shut down with COVID. And I wasn't able to be there because of a pending COVID test. I actually found out in the parking lot of the hospital from infectious disease that I couldn't go in. And so I get back on the highway and I'm weeping on my way home, and I get to my backyard and I'm standing outside and I'm yelling at God. Why is this happening to me? Why are you doing this? You know how important this was for me. You know how desperately I wanted to be in the room. Kylie's in there by herself. There's nobody with her. There's nobody who can help fix this. Like, God, what are you doing? Why is this happening to me? Why are you letting me go through this? And I am yelling at God in my backyard. And it wasn't an audible voice, but y'all, I am so clear that I heard from God. I felt like what the Lord said to me is this: hey, you preach what's true. When are you going to start living like it? And I just sat. And as I listened to the wind blow, as I heard the birds chirp, as I looked at the massiveness of creation, I had a moment where I realized, oh, you're God. This is going to be okay. And I just sat and listened. And I felt like what the Lord whispered in my heart was like, hey, I want you to fast until you can go to the hospital. And so for 3 or 4 days, I didn't eat a single thing. And I prayed, and I wept, and I cried myself to sleep at night. And I was so frustrated, but I just kept leaning in, going, God, you got to be up to something. You got to be up to something. You got to be up to something. That Friday, I get the call that I can go into the hospital, get to see and hold my girls. But I just want to be so clear. My fasting did not change my test results. My fasting did not get me into the hospital any more quickly. My fasting didn't make it hurt any less or take away the pain. But y'all, that 4 days where I sat with God and I ate nothing, there was something that was built up in me, and I have not been the same since. There are some things that God taught me that I did not understand before that. There are some ways that I learned to trust him and depend on him that I had never had to do before. I really learned what it meant to fast. I'd heard about it. I'd never really done it. I learned what it meant to do at that time. I learned what it meant to really pray, like not to just say the prayer because you're supposed to pray it, but like to cry out for God in desperation. There were some things that were molded in me and shaped in me that would not be me if it was not for it. I would not be the dad that I am today without it. I wouldn't be the husband that I am today without it. Y'all, I don't think we would have planted this church had we not gone through that season. But God did a work in me and through us, and I started to see that maybe the suffering that I so desperately wanted to get out of was a momentary suffering that God would use to mold and shape and build me into who he wanted me to be. I am just telling you, I don't wish suffering on you. I don't wish struggles on you, but I do wish that we would not run away from it, but rather we'd press into it and have a different perspective, going, God, I don't want to miss what you're doing. I want in on what you're doing. If you're going to use me, build me, shape me, mold me, and if this is what it takes, if this is the way that you're going to chisel me into your image, I'm in. I'll take the suffering, and I will choose to consider it pure joy. And here's what you will find, y'all, is that the suffering is never the end of the story. Come on, because you've been through some things, and you're on the other side of it right now, aren't you? You've had some moments that you weren't sure you were going to make it, and you're still here. You've been through some fires, and it refined you and shaped you. And no, are we perfect? No. But are we still around? Has he not brought us through? You see, the story doesn't end with suffering. And I can say that definitively, not just because I've seen it in my story, not because you can testify to it in your story. The reason that I can say so definitively that the story does not end with suffering is because 2,000 years ago, God gave us the greatest picture ever of this. That Jesus would look on this broken world and he would go, I'm not gonna leave them that way. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna fix it. 33 perfect years, never sinning, never failing, never missing the mark. Accused for crimes he didn't commit, beaten within inches of his own life, nailed to a Roman cross, nails through his wrists and his feet. He would suffocate in a hot Israeli sun for hours. And the irony of this moment is that the Romans thought that they put him on the cross, but they didn't. The Jewish leaders thought that they were the ones who put him on the cross, but they didn't. The reality of this moment is that Jesus willingly went to the cross for you and for me. It was not the nails that held him there, it was the joy that held him there. What joy? Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 says it like this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, other saints who have gone through the struggle, who have gone through the suffering, he says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with, here's our word, perseverance, the race that's been marked out for us. Fixing our eyes on who? Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Don't miss this. Who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and is now seated down at the right hand of the throne of God. What is the writer of Hebrews saying? Is that Jesus looked into the future and he saw people who would go from death to life. He looked into the future, he saw marriages that would be restored. He looked into the future, he saw anxiety and depression that would be lifted. He looked into the future, he saw identities that would be changed. He looked into the future, he saw people who would look more and more and more like him. And he goes, oh, that's joy. Oh, I want that. I'll do whatever it takes to get that. So if it means laying down my life, if it means there's a moment in a garden where this is really hard, I'm not sure. No, I'm gonna keep going. There is a joy ahead of me and I will do whatever is necessary to get to that picture for them. So for the joy, hang me on the cross. For the joy, beat me within inches of my life. For the joy, tried to take me out. But at the end of the day, you did not put me here. I chose to be here for them. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And here's the point, y'all, that God would take on suffering for us, that he would take joy in suffering for us, so that in our suffering, we might find our joy in him. That God would take joy in suffering for us so that in the moments, in the seasons of suffering that we face, we might be able to find joy in him. Hear me, where Jesus is, joy is always available. And if your perspective could change to see that, then everything about your life would change as well. So how do we really change? How do we get this real and lasting change that we so desperately desire? Well, we ask God to change our heart. We go, God, I need you to get in here and I need you to do some surgery. I need you to get this thing out of me because I don't want to be who I was. We ask God for his guidance and we follow his word and we follow his spirit and we follow his people and we experience the change that he wants to bring in us. And we consider our perspective. We ask God to give us new eyes to see the way that he sees, to endure to the end, to experience his joy in us. How do you really change? Change of heart, change of God, change of perspective, change life. Heavenly Father, thank you that you did not choose to leave us as we were, but you chose to offer us a way to experience a new life. And it's by your strength and power that you do it. So would you change our hearts? Would you guide our steps? Would you open our eyes? And would you help us to live life more like you? Thank you for the joy of suffering for us, that in our seasons of suffering, we might find our joy in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
You're listening to audio from Home Church Roswell, located in Roswell, Georgia. For more information about this ministry or to give to this ministry, please visit homechurchroswell.com.